The snow lay thick over the forest near Holtzwihr in the wintry chill of January 26, 1945. The air was sharp, cold, the rifles muffled by cloth, the breath of young soldiers drifting in the pale afternoon light. For a moment silence, uneasy, waiting. Among them stood a young Texan, Audie Murphy, barely 19, with a worn carbine in his hands and frost on his boots. The war had already carved lines on his face. He looked out over the woods at the frozen ground and skeletal trees. He had just taken command of Company B. Many of his comrades were lost or wounded, officers gone, far too few men left. They were exhausted, hungry, tense. Their orders: hold the woods, wait for reinforcements, keep quiet, stay alert. Murphy's heart pounded. The ground shivered under his boots, not from cold, from fear. But he stayed calm enough. He tightened his grip on the radio handset. The forest felt still. The wind whispered. He knew what was coming, felt it in the shadows beyond the trees. Tanks, infantry, flames, noise, that kind of storm. He had faced danger before. Pain, loss, bullets, shells, but nothing this heavy. He glanced at the men around him. Young faces, tired bodies, quiet resolve. Some hoping to survive, some just hoping for dawn. None knowing that soon the quiet would break, hard, brutal, forever. Murphy did not speak much. He listened, watched, breathed. For now the forest held its breath too. Soon that calm would shatter. Just after 2 p.m., on 26th of January 1945, a strange hush settled over the frozen clearing near Holtzwihr in northeast France. The wind seemed to pause, but then a low rumble rolled over the snow. 6 enemy tanks gliding over hard ground, followed by wave upon wave of German infantry, stark shapes against the winter light. For a moment panic surged. The men of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, barely 18 soldiers left from an original force over 200 strong, felt the weight of hopelessness. Their officers were gone, their comrades wounded or missing. The forest behind them offered some cover, but the open ground ahead was a gauntlet. Then a voice rose steady, cutting through the fear. Audie Murphy, he ordered his men, fall back into the woods. Let the trees be their shield. He remained forward, clutching his radio handset and his carbine, eyes on the advancing enemy. Behind him, to his right, one of the American M10 tank destroyers took a direct hit. Its hull erupted in flame and smoke. The crew abandoned it. The fire hissed, black smoke curled into the sky, and the vehicle groaned under the heat. The shell fire rattled the frozen earth. Murphy didn't flinch. He stayed in place. While calling for artillery fire on the advancing Germans, he kept up rifle fire with his carbine, each shot a pulse in the chaos. The bullets cracked against wood, against metal, against snow. The German infantry pressed on, shoulder to shoulder, the tanks close behind. As the German units closed in, tanks coming abreast of his position, Murphy spotted an opportunity. The burning tank destroyer, its .50 caliber machine gun still intact. With the tank's heavy metal looming and enemy soldiers edging closer by the dozen, he climbed onto the turret. Smoke and fire licked around him. The vehicle might explode at any moment. He was exposed from 3 sides, but he took hold of the machine gun and began to fire. The roar of the .50 caliber gun cut through the afternoon hush. Bursts of lead tore through advancing ranks. Some Germans dropped where they stood. Others dove for cover, and the tanks, those roaring beasts, slowed. Their infantry support wavered. The threat they posed began to falter. For over an hour, Murphy stood there, a single figure in a flaming metal tower, firing at a force that outnumbered him by dozens, maybe hundreds. It was not a heroic pose in some epic tale. There was smoke that burned the throat. There was cold that numbed fingers. There were thuds and cracks, bullets whizzing past, shells exploding around him. There was a young man alone, with a gun and grit, shivering but steady. And in that terrible moment, he decided he would not back down. As rounds echoed across the snow and the German advance slowed, the clearing shivered under war. The silence never returned. Snow lay like a cold white blanket over the ground outside Holtzwihr, France, silent, except for distant whispers of wind and the tight breath of fear. At 2 p.m. on 26th of January 1945, the hush shattered. Over 100 German infantry advanced, backed by 6 tanks, pressing like a dark wave onto the remaining 18 men of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, and the only officer among them, Audie L. Murphy. Murphy ordered his men back into the woods. Their odds were gone. Their shelter, a frozen forest. He stayed forward, clutching his radio handset, calling for artillery. The winter air bit at his cheeks. Bullets began to crack. Tanks rumbled forward. Then came the flash. An M10 tank destroyer nearby took a direct hit. Flames blossomed. The crew fled. Murphy stared at the burning hulk, saw the .50 caliber machine gun still intact. With the forest behind, no cover ahead, no backup, he made a decision that carved his name into memory. He stepped onto the turret of the burning tank destroyer. Smoke curled. The heat stung. The whole thing could blow at any moment. What followed was more than courage. It was resistance in its rawest form. With that machine gun in his hands, he raked burst after burst across advancing German infantry. Foot soldiers dropping, tanks stalled, German units wavering. Some reached as close as 10 yards, only to be cut down. For over an hour, Murphy stood alone, exposed to fire from 3 sides. A young soldier, bloodied leg and freezing cold, ammunition dwindling, still, steady, still firing, still holding on. When the final rounds fell silent, the field was littered with the bodies of fallen attackers. Estimates say Murphy killed or wounded about 50 German soldiers that afternoon. Then, wounded, breath-ragged, he climbed down. He refused immediate medical help. Instead, he gathered the men who'd retreated, rallied them, and led a counterattack. They pushed the enemy back toward Holtzwihr. The forest held, their position stood, their lives, for many, were spared. In that moment, the quiet forest became the scene of a stand no one expected. One boy from Texas, with a rifle, a radio, and unspoken fear, changed everything, and the snow never seemed to rest the same way again. A quiet memory sits behind every act of bravery, and for Audie Murphy, it began long before the frozen woods of Holtzwihr. His story traces back to a small farm near Kingston, Texas, where he was born on June 20th, 1925. He was just a boy when the Great Depression pushed families to the edge. Days were long, food was scarce, and childhood felt shorter than it should have. School came second to fieldwork, and responsibility arrived far too early. By the time he reached 17, war was no longer a distant headline. It was a pull he felt in his bones. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, he tried to enlist, but the services turned him away. Too young, too small. Months later, on June 30th, 1942, the Army finally accepted him. From that moment on, the boy who once picked cotton began a march into history. His early months in uniform took him from training grounds to the harsh realities of combat in Sicily in 1943. He learned quickly how to move low, how to read danger in silence, how to steady his hands even when his heart pounded. He fought through Italy, earning his first decorations for bravery, not with fanfare, but with the weight of each decision made under fire. In September 1944, near Montélimar and later in the Vosges, he distinguished himself again, surviving wounds, ambushes, and the relentless grind of battle. These moments weren't told as legends then. They were small flashes of survival, shared only between men who understood how fear settled into the skin. Word of his stand at Holtzwihr on January 26, 1945 spread quickly, carried by officers' reports and the stunned voices of the men he commanded. The Army read the accounts, the paperwork moved upward, and a young soldier who once forged his age just to get into uniform suddenly found the world trying to understand how one man had held the line alone. And yet, beneath every medal and headline, he was still the boy from Texas, quiet, watchful, and carrying the memories no one else could see. Something in him shifted after that day in the snow. Not loud, not visible, just a small weight settling deeper into the heart, where only he could feel it. Some stories rise above the noise of war. But every battlefield holds names that never reached the newspapers. Before dawn or after dusk, in mud, snow, or burning heat, countless soldiers faced moments where no one else could step forward, so they did. In the months before Holtzwihr, Murphy had fought beside men who stood their ground in ways the world would never hear about. A rifleman who held a ridge near Montélimar until help arrived. A machine gun crew in the Vosges who kept firing even after losing half their team. A medic who crawled through open fields at night, ignoring bullets that snapped so close they sounded like angry bees. Their acts didn't earn medals or ceremonies. They stayed quiet in after-action reports, tucked behind official words and missing details. Across the ocean, the same truth held in the Pacific. In the damp jungles of Guadalcanal, Marines fought through nights when they had to defend positions with only a handful of men, knowing no reinforcements were coming. Some charged enemy foxholes to save their squads. Others carried wounded friends through waist-deep mud under fire. No headlines captured their fear or resolve. No cameras caught their final breaths. War creates rare moments when a single person ends up alone against something far larger. Murphy's stand was one of those moments, unforgettable, documented, witnessed. But hundreds of others had moments just as heavy, sometimes lasting seconds, sometimes stretching through long, punishing nights. Their stories didn't echo. They simply stayed with the men who survived, carried like quiet scars. And while history remembers a few, the truth hangs in the silence between names. Heroism never belonged to one soldier, or even two. It lived in countless small corners of the war, where someone made a choice no one else saw. Somewhere in those shadows, another story is waiting, one that leads us far from France, across an ocean into a different kind of night. Rain dripped heavy in the jungle on Guadalcanal. The air was thick, humid, warm, close. Leaves clung, the earth pulsed under boots, and the night felt alive in a way the cold European snow never had. In that jungle, a different kind of fight waited. On 24th October 1942, John Basilone stood in the darkness near Henderson Field in command of 2 sections of heavy .30 caliber machine guns. He and about 16 Marines dug in along a ridge, a fragile line against a looming storm. As midnight approached, the sounds began, distant rustling, then the rush of thousands of footsteps. A force of around 3,000 Japanese soldiers from the Sendai Division advanced under darkness and rain, determined to retake the airstrip. Basilone's men opened fire. Machine guns cracked through the jungle night. Grenades and mortars burst nearby. The rain turned to mud, the air filled with smoke, sweat, fear. One of his machine gun sections was knocked out, the crew killed or wounded. Faced with silence where there should have been power, Basilone didn't hesitate. He lifted a heavy machine gun, its tripod and all, nearly 90 pounds, and sprinted roughly 200 yards under enemy fire toward the silenced position. He reached it. With shaking hands, he brought the gun to life again. Then he ran back. And again. Over and over, carrying ammunition, clearing jams, shifting guns, firing. Whenever a gun jammed, he fixed it. Whenever a new wave came, he was there. At some points, his teams ran out of shells. Supply lines were cut. Under fire, Basilone, ammo in hand, raced through enemy lines to fetch more, then raced back, reloaded, resumed fire. He didn't stop. The night stretched on. The jungle, wild, dark, merciless, echoed with gunfire and cries. When the dawn came, only Basilone and 2 other Marines were still standing from that original group guarding the ridge. The attacking Japanese force, waves of men, had been repelled. The airstrip stood. In that humid jungle night on Guadalcanal, a single sergeant carried a heavy gun through rain, mud, and enemy fire, and kept a line alive. His stand did not happen under the silent snow of France. It happened under tangled vines, flickering rain, and the darkness of the Pacific. And from that night onward, the war would never treat him as just another soldier. The jungle was darker now. Cloud-choked moonlight barely touched the ridge, and every breath tasted of mud and cordite. John Basilone wiped sweat from his eyes with the back of his wrist. Though the heat never eased, not even in the early hours of 25 October 1942. His hands were raw, burned from gripping hot barrels, yet he kept working the gun as if pain were something he could set aside for later. The first machine gun section was gone, bodies still, smoke drifting above torn earth. The second section was running thin, its men exhausted, ammunition nearly spent. And somewhere behind the ridge, the Japanese lines were thickening again. Reports said hundreds were regrouping for another charge. Some Marines heard whistles, others heard chanting. Basilone only heard the steady pulse of his own heartbeat and the metallic clatter of the Browning as he fed another belt through. Then the gun jammed, a bitter click, a dead stop. He didn't curse, didn't freeze. He knelt, pulled the cover, reached into scalding metal, and cleared the stoppage with blistered fingertips. The belt snapped forward. The gun spat fire again. Moments later, 2 Marines beside him dropped, one wounded, one silent. The line felt thinner by the second. Basilone drew his Colt 45 and fired into shadows no more than a few yards away. Figures lunged through the undergrowth. He drove them back with short, sharp bursts. Then he grabbed the machine gun by its receiver and dragged it a few feet to a better angle, ignoring the heat that seared his palms. When the belts finally ran dry, there was no question what came next. Basilone slung the empty bandoliers over his shoulder, ducked low, and sprinted through the tangle of jungle, past bodies, craters, shell-splintered trees. He ran nearly 100 yards through enemy-held terrain to reach the ammunition point. Some Marines yelled for him to wait for cover. He didn't. He heaved fresh belts onto his shoulders and ran back the same way, rounds snapping at branches above him. He made that run more than once. No one kept count. They were too busy staying alive. Each time he returned, the gun roared again, stitching lines of fire across the charging troops. Waves of attackers crashed into the ridge, and each time the line bent but did not break. Basilone moved between guns, clearing stoppages, lifting barrels, passing ammunition, steadying the men with nothing more than presence and breathless orders. Hours dragged by like whole days. The fight did not ease until the sky began to pale, and the jungle shape softened into morning. Bodies lay thick in front of the Marine positions, a testament to the relentless night. And of the small group Basilone had started with, only a few still stood beside him. He didn't celebrate, didn't speak much at all. He just set the last empty belt aside, exhaled, and looked over the ridge he had held with little more than muscle, grit, and a refusal to let the line fall. And dawn, for a brief second, felt almost quiet, as if the island itself was catching its breath before the next storm. Dawn broke over the jungle ridge of Guadalcanal, gray light slipping through palm fronds and dripping leaves. The night's roar had ended, the rain had stopped. In the quiet, the ground told its story. Bodies lying still, spent shells, scattered like fallen rain, the tangled undergrowth torn and torn again. Out of the small group of Marines who had held the line under John Basilone's command, only 3 remained alive. The rest, his comrades, his brothers in those tents of mud and darkness, had fallen. Their names, their faces, lost in the hush of what war leaves behind. The Japanese assault that night, part of the battle for Henderson Field, 24-26 October 1942, had ended in failure for the attackers. Their force, thousands strong, was hurled back, crushed beneath repeated Marine and Army resistance. Their casualties mounted by the hundreds, many left uncounted among jungle shadows and scrub. The airstrip Henderson Field held, its runways, once contested, bloody, uncertain, remained under American control. The perimeter held. The thin line of defenders stood, trembling, bleeding, alive. Basilone, bloodied knuckles, burning arms, sleepless eyes, leaned against a tree. His machine guns lay silent now. In the hush, he didn't shout. He just exhaled, low and slow, as if hoping the jungle would forgive the night's violence. Around him, mud stuck to boots. The smell of cordite still hung heavy. The cost of that stand was written in bodies and in silence. But the cost was not in vain. The ridge was secure. Henderson Field would not fall that night. And in a war that often moved with tides of fear and desperation, for a moment, a terrible, terrible moment, a handful of men held fast. Basilone and the two others who stood became living proof that sometimes a line held at all costs still matters. In the quiet that followed, broken only by distant birds or shifting wind, the island seemed to hold its breath, too. When dawn broke over Guadalcanal's ridge and John Basilone survived what seemed impossible, word spread fast, all the way to America. In August 1943, after being awarded the Medal of Honor, he was sent home for a war bond tour, a national publicity push to rally support for the war effort. On Sunday, 19th of September 1943, his hometown Raritan, New Jersey held a massive homecoming parade. Estimates put the crowd at around 30,000, people from every walk of life, drawn by respect, admiration, curiosity. The moment made headlines in national press, featured in magazines and newsreels shown everywhere. For a time, Basilone walked the streets as Manila John, the nation's symbol of bravery. He toured theaters and halls with actors and war bond promoters. He posed for photographs. He signed posters. But inside him, that spotlight felt wrong. The crowds, the applause, none of it reflected what he thought war meant. He told those who asked he was just a plain soldier. He turned down an offer of a commission as an officer. He said no to becoming an instructor or staying in safe assignments. His heart remained with his comrades overseas. In time, his request came back to the front. On 27 December 1943, he passed through training again at Camp Pendleton, California, preparing for what would be the biggest fight yet. Amid that return to war, he found something new: love. There he met a fellow Marine, Sergeant Lena Mae Riggy, a woman who shared his service, his sacrifices. On 10th of July 1944, they married in Oceanside, a brief moment of peace before the next storm. After the wedding, there were no parades, no celebrities, no cheering crowds. There were orders to redeploy. There was danger ahead. And for Basilone, there was only one path he could walk: forward with his brothers and Marines, carrying the weight of war again. In that choice, leaving home, leaving comfort, returning to combat, he showed what he believed real duty meant. The medals, the fame, those were extras. What mattered was the line he'd sworn to hold. The black sand of Iwo Jima felt cold under boots that morning of 19th of February 1945, but the air was thick with smoke, fear, and the roar of war. John Basilone landed with his section on Red Beach 2 as part of the first wave. The shoreline erupted in fire. Enemy machine guns cracked, mortar shells screamed, and the beach turned into chaos. With calm resolve, Basilone slipped through the chaos toward an enemy blockhouse, a fortified strongpoint that pinned down fellow Marines under merciless fire. Alone and exposed, he climbed onto that blockhouse. He tossed grenades, set demolitions, and directed a flamethrower squad against the defenders. The structure erupted. The Japanese inside were crushed. By doing so, nearly single-handed, he opened a path for the Marines to leave the beach. But his fight did not end there. A Marine tank trapped inside a minefield under heavy mortar and artillery fire was stranded. Basilone moved through the ash and bullets, guided the tank out, helped steer it to safety, a small act of salvation amid hellish combat. Then, as he moved along the edge of the airfield, the enemy fire found him. Reports vary. Mortar shrapnel, small arms fire, but one witness, a former trainee, remembered the moment. Basilone fell. His life, like that of so many others, ended on those black sands. He was 28. In the dark aftermath, the Marines kept advancing. The landing succeeded. Iwo Jima remained under American control. But one man would not walk back. The only enlisted Marine of World War II to hold both Medal of Honor and Navy Cross, Basilone gave what mattered most. Back home, in a small town in New Jersey and beyond, people remembered. They named streets, bridges, a destroyer after him. They raised statues. In every memorial, the quiet ones, the grand ones, they tried to hold on to what his stand meant. Yet memory can only carry so much. For his widow, Lena Mae Riggy, loss echoed every day. They had married barely 7 months earlier. Their hopes, their quiet promises of a life after war, they vanished on Iwo's ash and fire. History remembers the hero, the medals, the bravery, but the deeper truth, the weight carried in empty uniforms, in silent fields, in grief that outlasts headlines, that belongs to the living who survive. So we end here, not with a flourish, but with that silence. The guns fell quiet, the smoke cleared, and somewhere in the hush we still hear the echo of one man who stood, alone, and paid everything.